Welcome to our final conference session of the 2011 Extraordinary Technology Conference. I'm Michael Riversong. We are about to hear from David Talbot. He's the founder of the Thunderbolt project. The Thunderbolt project is an internet presence speaking of the electric universe paradigm. He's written several books, including Thunderbolts of the Gods, The Electric Universe. Back in 1980, his book Saturn Myth was published by Doubleday, so he's been at this for about 39 years. Let's welcome David Talbot.
Thank you. Okay. We have to grin and bear one thing here, and that is that a slide presentation has been translated into a video because the technology for converting Apple, Mac presentations to this protocol here hasn't delivered what we had hoped and expected. So we just rendered it as a video. Now, if you imagine a slide presentation rendered as a video, the problem is anticipating you're not in control of it. So it's going to come fairly fast. I felt that fast was better than slow, where suddenly, okay, my line is finished, but it's still hanging in there. So there may be a couple, 3 times where I will ask John to pause. But so we don't continue to say pause, now play, pause, now play. I'm going to use a different strategy, which is to actually let this play fast and depend more on your intuitive sense of integrity. Because that's the whole point here, that there is a bedrock of human memory in ancient times. You will never prove anything by examining, even in the most exquisite detail, a particular myth. You can't prove anything. Nothing ever has been proven by an analysis of a particular myth. But there is a bedrock. And when it comes to this reconstruction of things in the ancient sky, the bedrock, the principle of bedrock, is the single most important principle to bring to the investigation. The bedrock means around the world, points of agreement between disconnected cultures on absolutely fundamental points. There was once a golden age. There was a cosmic mountain that rose to the center of the sky. It was the axis of the turning heavens. There are 1,000 points of agreement between the different cultures, and this is provable. 1,000 points of agreement, and they stand in total integrity. Now, there's no way that I would be able to convince you of this in a 45-minute presentation. So I'm going to count on you to pick up a few points of integrity at a level of great specificity as we move through these convergences. It gets more and more specific. And in the end, this is a convergence between a study of history, mythic archetypes and symbols on the one hand, and the leading edge of plasma science on the other. So let's just move right through this thing. We can fire her up. So what is that object in the hand of this sovereign power in the sky? It is, in fact, a bridge between myth and science. It opens a door to a whole world of ancient civilization, cultures looking back to such phenomenon as this, the favorite weapon of the warrior gods. So bedrock fact, the cosmic thunderbolt never looks like lightning. Is that significant? The warrior god's weapon was not inspired by any practical function. The form of that arrowhead, so to speak, would render it completely ineffective. But what is that? The Thunderbolt was interpreted mythically in many different forms, including as a mace held in the hand of the warrior god, but also that flowering form on the right. Very few people seem to know that the trident was a form of the cosmic thunderbolt. That's not questioned by the best authorities. So there is this key form, the Hindu Vajra and Dorje, extremely well known. The great weapon in the hands of the warrior god Indra when he vanquished the chaos dragon. And all of these weapons, whatever the culture, they take you back to that catastrophic episode in the history of the gods. And notice the overriding bipolar form. Have you ever seen lightning take a bipolar form? Notice the helical, corkscrew directions of that electrical phenomenon, and the outreaching arms in two directions. Here are just a few quick glimpses from Greek coins of the cosmic thunderbolt. Again, not one representing lightning, but if you observe this sequence closely, you begin to see that there is a suggestion of underlying integrity in an evolving form. And that's what plasma science does reveal to us now. Another point here is that the cosmic thunderbolt was, in fact, the prototype of the warrior hero's weapons in all the myth-making or storytelling of antiquity. First, there was the cosmic thunderbolt. Later, storytelling rendered that form in the sky in more familiar terms as a weapon. And this can be shown not only by the evolution of the forms over time, but by the best experts on the subject. What I like about this image from Rome is it is actually a superimposition of the different phases in the evolution of a spectacularly violently evolving formation in the sky. Experts do not disagree on this, that the spear and the golden sword of Zeus were forms of the cosmic thunderbolt. The same is true, the best experts acknowledge that the famous arrow of Apollo, by which he vanquished the great dragon Python, was originally the cosmic thunderbolt. So this is a subject on which one can refer to the original text to see what this means. The sword is the thunderbolt. Ananda Kumaraswamy, certainly amongst the 2 or 3 best experts in the world on Buddhist. I don't think I'll use that, actually. I don't think I need that. Okay. A derivation of the sword from an archetype in lightning. That's exactly what I was suggesting. In the late 1990s, I thought I was the one who discovered that. Not true. Here is an unequivocal statement by René Guénon, a very distinguished student of comparative symbolism. Always the thunderbolt, never anything else. May look like a sword or a hammer or an axe. It was originally a thunderbolt. Also, there's the connection to the red-faced, red-skinned warrior. The red isn't showing up too well here, but I will just leave this with you. That warrior god was the thunderbolt, and it is identifiable as the planet Mars. Now, we're going to jump then to the laboratory. Now, is there anything familiar in that? And if you imagine that in 2 directions, there's a bipolar discharge, you get a sense of what is actually seen in the laboratory with the most intense electric discharge. Knots, toroids, and wings emerge in the plasma instabilities. It is a dramatically evolving, highest energy discharge. And by the way, much of this work was done locally at Los Alamos. This is an example from a plasma laboratory where what looks like prongs of a fork, these are actually cylinders. So every prong on the left will have a counterpart on the right. You're just seeing the region of those cylinders. You're seeing them on a line of sight, which reveals to you the region of greatest density. Here is a representation of evolving electric discharge in the laboratory. You see the toruses spreading out, warping upward, embedded cylinders, pinching of the cylinders at the base. It allows you to completely reconsider these exotic, kind of elaborate representations. The most important figure or portion of that symbolic image is the circle in the center, because that, in this reconstruction, is a planet. It is the warrior god himself. Here is the Thunderbolt in its early phase, held by Zeus. That's illustrating from the actual representations of the Thunderbolt in Greece, representing the evolutionary sequence. Torus is warping, stretching upward, central helical axis, embedded cylinders, but always there is this circle of different relative sizes or sphere, which is the core. It's the electrode, let's say. And the thesis is it's a planet. It's the warrior god. That's not something I'm going to be able to prove to you. Let's pause here for just a second, if we could, John. Okay. I should say something, having dropped this idea of the identity of the Thunderbolt with the planet Mars as an electrically charged object in the sky. The hypothesis is this. The planetary system has changed. Mars was once an extremely dynamic electrical body in the sky. It was involved in a configuration of planets discharging along its axis, appearing in the sky as a huge, terrifying thunderbolt, launched by the overarching power in the sky that was not Mars. Mars will always appear as the great warrior. The great warrior will always appear as the servant of the overarching power in the sky. He is the thunderbolt launched by that power. Now, is it just random speculation and guesswork to identify that thunderbolt with Mars? Where I can't prove this point to you, it is, in my mind, a well-proven point from systematic cross-cultural comparison. Just consider this one fact as a pointer in the direction of this identity. The planet Mars is the only planet that in every culture that looked out at that planet and said something about it was identified as a great warrior. In the same way, the planet Venus is the only planet that ancient cultures looked out to and said, this is the mother goddess. It's the only planet. Venus was never, Mars was never given female form. It never happened. And when you think of the differences between the different cultures, all the different words and so on that they use to express their historic experiences, these convergences add up to bedrock in the end. Okay, John. Now I'm going to show just a brief video sequence from Symbols of an Alien Sky, since I can't cover the ground in a brief presentation. This will help.
More than 10,000 years ago, Paleolithic artists painted these images on the walls of Lascaux Cave in France. They were realists, with an exceptional eye for detail. Why these talented artists of the Stone Age disappeared remains a mystery. But the greater mystery is the epoch that followed. It seems that Neolithic artists lost the ability to depict nature as we know it. Accurate representations of nature are present, but the dominant style produced a carnival of ghostly creatures in absurd forms never seen in our world. How did this tendency arise? Not in one land alone, but on every habitable continent. Absurd? Yes. But what
Provoked the distinctive patterns? A stick man with no head, just a duck or other bird on his shoulders? Hundreds of variations on this theme occur in the American Southwest. But the pattern doesn't end there. Notice the twin dots on the two sides of these crudely crafted stick figures. One instance alone is just a curiosity. But widespread patterns must have an explanation. And other details only accent the irrationality. Recently, an answer to these mysteries came from outside traditional archaeology, from plasma science and laboratory experiments with electric discharge. Plasma scientist Anthony Peratt of Los Alamos Laboratories has shown that these stick forms recorded electrical events in the sky. Something like the northern lights we see today, but 1,000 times more energetic. And he matches the rock art forms precisely to the configurations taken by electric discharge in the laboratory. The rock art images are explained as sheets of intense electric current in the evolution of a plasma discharge. The central column you see in this stylized representation is the axis of the discharge. Wrapped around the axis is a torus or donut-like tubular sheet of charged particles. The observer sees through the transparent formation, champagne glass above, squashed bell shape below, so the plasma density is greatest at the limbs. Drawn in 2 dimensions, the formation matches the stick man carved globally on stone by the thousands. The 2 dots under the stick man's arms are the exceedingly bright, high-energy radiation called synchrotron radiation, emitted from the center of the torus. The current sheets continually warp as the electric discharge progresses, and this form is not uncommon. A 2-dimensional representation might look like this. Pratt's work has shown that the stick man, the duck-headed version of the American Southwest, and variations from Hawaii to Saudi Arabia, is a plasma discharge formation, a subject on which he is an acknowledged world expert. Okay, now jumping to the context then within the sciences and a movement that is well underway today to reconsider the nature of our cosmic environment. The picture of space is changing, and it is actually provoking now extraordinary new possibilities. Not only that, the textbook picture is broken. How many people today could honestly deny that that is a fact? What is being discovered in space today is a relentless flow of surprises. Well, when that happens, there's nothing that is going to work other than to step back from prior assumption. A broken picture of space doesn't just mean it can't be fixed. It means they have to look inside the structures they're observing to explain what's happening. It all must come from an internal dynamic. On the other hand, an electric universe is only to be expected given the plasma environment that we now know is the nature of space today. This allows for the possibility that things going on across this huge seeming emptiness, these events are actually storing immense charge. And this charge in its flow can focus down to high energy cosmic events, hourglass forms, probably the most important form of all in intense electric discharge. The beading that you see around the neck of that hourglass is an illustration of plasma discharge beading or lightning beading. And it's occurring so fast that in just the span of a few years, from 1994 to 2006, that level of evolution of the luminous beads occurred. Bipolar nebulas, an electric discharge phenomenon. Can you imagine having to explain all of that by gravity? There's a beautiful hourglass form at the center of that configuration. So what do the space-age surprises tell us? Surprises, as a rule, will not come randomly. They're pointing to something. The fact of the matter is that in the lexicon of astronomy today, virtually every surprise requires them to use the word electromagnetism. Is that telling us something? If it's not being observed, it's because the field of view is way too narrow. They're not seeing the evidence that is shouting to them that their suppositions are not correct. And they have systematically precluded the scientific maverick and outsiders. I mean, that's what peer review means today. It's just a gatekeeping system. And I believe every person in this room already knows that is true. Now, this is just a moment of personal biography. I was drawn into the study of ancient cultures by Immanuel Velikovsky, a hugely controversial figure, and I just came to believe that he really had something essential to tell us. I didn't conclude in the end that he was spot on in his analysis, but there's an underlying message that he gives to us that is crucial. And that message will hopefully come up, and it did, okay. Planetary instability within human memory. Total contradiction of established science. Electricity was highly active. Velikovsky was amongst the true pioneers in recognizing that dilemmas will not be resolved in the absence of electricity. And human memories count as evidence. I was the founder and publisher of this series on Velikovsky, which gained a great deal of attention internationally, became the #1 bestseller on a number of college campuses. And that was the beginning of a movement that has continued very much in the background to a considerable extent. But it was the movement that inspired my own life research. 10 issues of the series on Velikovsky were eventually published, and there were people who were deeply involved in that publication for whom it set in motion a life's work. A word about the research method. As I said, you can't prove anything by analyzing a particular myth, but you will be stunned by what you can prove by the points of agreement between the ancient cultures. Stunned by it. The points of agreement could not be there without the celestial provocation. The points of agreement are drawing your attention to the earliest sources dealing with that particular theme, because they were the ones closest to the original experience. So yes, I concentrated on ancient Sumer, ancient Babylon, ancient Egypt. All commemorative expressions count as evidence. And if you take away the commemorative expressions of the early cultures, there's nothing left. Selective perception is not allowed. If it's a universal theme, it has to be integrated in, or you do not have a unified model. Now, I just said that if you take away the commemorative expressions, you won't have a civilization there. And that's because every monument was a commemorative expression. Nothing was constructed in ancient times without foundation ceremonies that harked back to the age of the gods. But you also have to take note of the astronomical traditions. And here, Mesopotamia is a key. They answer the question, have planets always moved on their present courses? And the answer is no. So we arrive at this underpinning issue. Who were the gods? What was the age of gods and wonders? Was there a culture anywhere on earth that didn't look back to these spectacles in the heavens? And where did the gods live? In later times, they've all been brought down to earth. The storytelling is located in a region on earth. It's our land, it's our story. These are our ancestors. But in the beginning, the answer is indisputable. They were in the sky. And you can follow the process by which they were brought down to earth. Why did we stop believing in the gods? Because that world did not continue. The more the distance from that epoch, the more the skepticism. We stopped believing in the gods. And yet we carried forward traditions such as there was once a golden age, an age of peace and plenty on earth and harmony in the sky. Again, not a culture was free of this tradition. This was the standard to which every early culture looked back for guidance. The myths of that epoch were the Word of God, the Word of God. Every race on earth remembered a world-ending disaster. But one of the things we begin to see about the recurring themes is that they're all connected. And what was this disaster? It was the cataclysm that brought the golden age to an end. Ragnarok, the reign of fire and gravel, the great deluge. And what was the nature of that creature in the sky presiding over this catastrophe? A biologically absurd monster. Long-haired, fiery, feathered, bearded. Nothing in the profile of this monster has any analog in nature, and yet it's global. So I'm asking you actually to just hold on to the possibility that there really is one story told around the world, one story constituted of the points of agreement between the early cultures, of which there are many more, countless more than you might have imagined. Now, why is the planet Saturn there? Because the one story told around the world, interpreted at the level of the origins of astronomy, will point to the planet Saturn, who was known, or which was known as the primeval sun. The words for sun were continually identified in that whole region of the Near East as the words for Saturn. Helios was archaically a word for Saturn. Sol was a word for Saturn. Shamash of the Babylonians was explicitly identified as Saturn. So these threads of research led to my book, The Saturn Myth, with a hypothesis that continued to expand in the following years. That was 1980. But I ask you to consider something as simple as these rock art images, which are almost universally called pictures of the sun. But just ask yourself if they look like pictures of the sun, and could we actually allow for or open the door to an investigation of the images much more carefully than that, because there are libraries of evidence that relate to these images. And on the upper image on the left, notice that the small central dot was actually down below. This is the form of the sun god Shamash. Shamash is the planet Saturn, the Babylonian text says. And can you imagine wanting to draw a picture of the sun like that? When we look out at the sky, this is what we see. But what was seen in ancient times is the forgotten epoch. And incidentally, when we review these images, it often gets very emotional for people because they do feel that there is something that is familiar to them, even if with their eyes they've never seen it before. But the forgotten epoch is the root, that's the bedrock of ancient myth and symbolism. That's the hypothesis in a nutshell. Here's a segment from Symbols of an Alien Sky. You're looking at reconstructed images of a formation in the heavens just a few thousand years ago. The configuration evolved through many phases, evoking reverence and awe, a model for kings and kingdoms for thousands of years. Great temples and cities and sacred mountains all pointed back to the mythic age of gods and wonders. Let the world's first astronomers point the way for us. They knew that what the myths and hymns and prayers called gods were planets and aspects of planets. Planets appeared close to the Earth in a heaven-spanning configuration. Memories of that celestial splendor still surround us, even if humanity later forgot much more than it remembered. Reconnecting with our forgotten past will be essential for our own cultural integrity, essential for the study of human consciousness, and essential for all of the sciences. Okay, now just for a moment on that configuration, and I'll be talking in just a second about the crescent that is seen below there, which is a reflection of the light from the sun. That crescent would revolve in the sky for this reason. This was a polar configuration. It was the center of the heavens. All that was seen in the sky revolved around that center with the rotation of the Earth. So what you are looking at there is a polar configuration in its midnight position of the revolving crescent. This leads then to a radical reinterpretation of two of the most common symbols in the ancient world. It says they're two aspects of the same form. One is just simply showing the great conjunction of the Golden Age, and the other is showing the crescent. As indicated here in the Sumerian pictographs, you see both the so-called sun symbol with the circle inside, and you see the revolving crescent. And it's not restricted to one area on the Earth. So certainly there is at least an indication here of revolution. The cycle would look like this. This would be the noon position of the crescent, sun above, sunset, midnight, and sunrise. Just an ancient daily cycle, probably amongst the the top 4 or 5 symbolic themes in ancient Egypt, for example. The daily cycle was recorded with hieroglyphs that make absolutely no sense today. Now, here's a curiosity. The celebrated moment of the day was created by the descending crescent as the sun set. So this was all over to the left, from the top down to the left to bottom. Notice there's no indication here, with all those indications of revolution, there's nothing over to the right. And that's a key indicator. They didn't care about the retreat of the light of the sun, the diminishing of the sun. Does that look like the moon? It's the only interpretation that's ever been given conventionally of the crescent. It's the most common form. It's almost the universal context of the crescent in Mesopotamia. Indications of the revolution of the crescent around a central star. Now here, just so you can see that the crescent had mythical content to it, you have to put the pillar of Mars, the pillar of material that descended from Mars as it was reaching down to become the pillar of the sky. The first form of the warrior hero is as the pillar of the sky, the one who raises up the heavens, who holds aloft the primeval sun, such as the pillar god Shu of Egypt. I'm mentioning this simply because it takes that pillar for the crescent to be able to fill its role as outstretched arms, outstretched wings, the horns of the bull of heaven. In the pyramid text, the bull of heaven is just a pillar and shining horns. This can be confirmed in many cultures. So if you interpret the hieroglyphs of arms in terms of that revolving crescent, the upraised arms mean coming to life, growing strong, this sort of thing, growing powerful, growing bright. The inverted would be always be the reverse of that. It would be the negative of the corresponding positive. Now, anybody can explore this for himself and see that this relationship holds up spectacularly well. Living Ra on the left and the Maya, symbol for power and life. I've left out an encyclopedia worth of symbolism of the revolving crescent just to go on here, because I want to lead up to the most dramatic convergence with science that occurred in the process of decades of research. The stairway to heaven is, of course, a global motif. Stairway, ladder to the sky, backbone of the sky are all identical in meaning. Imagine the Earth, the planet Mars, incredibly close, a stack of toruses, which we now know are formed in plasma discharge, up to Venus. And that formation in the sky is continually librating. This is a phase of great instability. This is the symbol of stability in an epoch of instability. Kind of the appearance of a terraced mound. Mars very close to the Earth, you're looking right up the stack of toruses. You don't see every torus for that reason. So the question is whether there is a field of evidence here presented by these mound-like pyramidal forms signifying the stairway to heaven, the steps of the sky, the tiers of heaven. Hundreds of examples of this can be given. And then there are the pictographs that present that ladder form from California, from Ireland, and from ancient Egypt, the papyrus of Anu. If we go back to the earliest sources, we'll want to look at the relationship between the pyramidal form and the cosmic serpent. The serpent and the stairway of the sky. The relationship is indicated, but it isn't explained by any particular image. But there is the serpent mountain, Coatepec, at the base, and above it, resting on it, is the stairway. Here is a serpent seeming to enter an edifice of some kind identified with the stairway to the sky. Here's the Egyptian hieroglyph for stairway with the warrior figure at the top. It's the warrior figure who's always doing the ascending and descending of that stairway. And here is the god Osiris, served by the warrior hero, like all universal sovereigns were, but a serpent overlaid with that. The serpent and the stairway of the temple of Quetzalcoatl. And in Thailand, the serpent and the stairway. And maybe this means nothing, or maybe it means something, and you won't know unless you actually investigate. I'm going to just jump into what I concluded now. I didn't know what a Birkeland current is, but we're helped now by this. When I reconstructed this, I had no idea of a Birkeland current. But Birkeland currents present a caduceus-type form. That's the flow of electricity under the influence of attractive force at greater distances than repulsion at closer distances, with the result that you get a spin, a twisting. Mesopotamia, twin serpents. And I'll just have to leave this with you, that the twin serpents, the one serpent with twin heads, the one-headed serpent with twin limbs and so on, they're all the same form. That's kind of a story unto itself. It has phases relating to the tightening of those twin currents. The winding of serpentine ropes around the cosmic mountain, a dominant motif in eastern lands and in others. The churning of Mount Mandara, the staff of Asclepius should not be separated conceptually from the twin serpents. And the idea of serpents winding up a pole is, again, a global motif. But is there anything that we can draw from this? Is there any reliable conclusion? It's important to just notice the tendency of electric current flow in intense discharging to form beads. This was intense electrical activity. And you will find 100 and more images of this, a serpentine figure whose body has become beads. There's a connection between this caduceus-like form and the ladder of heaven, but what is it? What I concluded was very simply that caduceus form divided into a stack of toruses. And I drew that conclusion having no idea what a plasma is, much less electric discharge in plasma and so on. This was all before I had converged with Walt Thornhill, the leading spokesman of the electric universe paradigm. Keep your eye on the form on the left. What an incredibly precise representation of nothing imaginable. Nothing. Australia, just an example of similar configurations. And if that's related to the electric current or Birkeland current form, you would expect these toruses then to be associated with the pinching of what are called sausage instabilities. Pinch points create the beginnings of a torus form. This was what was going on, I eventually concluded, in the idea of the hacking up of the cosmic serpent, who becomes the ladder of the sky. This was Ben Franklin's image, which probably, I suspect nobody knows where that came from, but in fact he must have gotten information from priests who had entered Mesoamerica and so on. The segmented serpent. In Egypt, I don't have this slide, but there's the image of the serpent moving up over a blade with segments of the serpent falling on the other side. So the segmented serpent in this reconstruction is related directly to the ladder of heaven, the rungs of the ladder of heaven. The severing of the limbs of the cosmic chaos serpent in Egypt was a core motif. But notice here, above you have the hacking up of the serpent. Below, you have the dying god Osiris, whose backbone, that's the backbone of the sky, was the ladder. The hieroglyph also means dismembered and to be hacked up. So there are threads of evidence that actually converge with extraordinary unity, and chain of arrows proved to be a decisive instance of unity in this seeming chaos. Those who know more about the polar configuration, the way it looked and so on, will have no trouble recognizing this, but what are the pyramidal forms along the cosmic column? That, throughout all of the Americas, was called the chain of arrows. A great warrior launches arrows into the sky. One arrowhead embeds itself in the arrow above, producing a chain of arrows. This was my reconstruction of that celestial form. It was done by Rick Smith, database manager at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. This was done before my convergence with Tony Peratt. I know many of you are aware of that convergence. Just an illustration of what was seen in the sky, a simplified illustration. The flaring out of the currents above. Though when I reconstructed that, I didn't know about the flaring out of currents. Native American design elements signify arrows, mountains, lightning. Remember the diversity of images pointing to the same form. Giants heaping one peak on top of another mountain peak, same motif, but not from North America. That's from Europe and Greece and so on. Stacked arrows. Now, you can see why, if there was something that provoked that representation, but in a different land, it wouldn't be called stacked arrows. It could be one peak on mountain peak on top of another. And here you see the stairway of this edifice. Well, the chain of arrows was outlined on the right. Here is just one of hundreds of symbols that combine arrow chain, toruses, and spherical forms. Now, what does all of this have to do with the idea of a flared skirt of the goddess? I realized that the flared skirt of the goddess was exactly the same form as the chain of arrows. And the more I investigated that, I could see that the tower-like qualities of that flared skirt were very pronounced in ancient Crete and ancient Mesopotamia. Here's a form of Inanna. Her skirt is that flared skirt form. She's holding the Thunderbolt form on the right, which shows the coiling currents upward. You can see the tower-like qualities of the flared skirt. These are Venus goddesses, Inanna and Ishtar. Back to the American Indian chain of arrows. The form on the right is a female figure, and the chain of arrows is her skirt. That's her skirt. The chain of arrows was inseparably connected to the serpent form, exactly as we should expect. The chain of arrows emerges as an intermediate phase in the segmentation of the serpent. Serpent in its relationship to the cosmic mountain, an inseparable relationship, but you would never discern it from just looking at an image in one land. So here we are again, this basic form, and the question becomes then, is there a relationship that can be found to the plasma universe? Now I get to the definitive moment of convergence with a man who was the leading authority on high-energy plasma discharge, Tony Peratt, in 2000. I invited him to a conference in Portland. Peratt was a colleague of Hannes Alfvén, the pioneer of modern plasma science, the father of plasma science, Nobel Prize winner. In this meeting, a private gathering of contributors, Tony went to the whiteboard and he said, "I can't believe I'm doing this." And he drew out a unique form that is named after him. It's a Peratt instability. His team members in that research project named this form after him. Okay, could we stop right here? Sorry. I should say just a little bit more about this. There were a number of people in the room at this time that actually knew they knew that I had reconstructed this form. Walt Thornhill, the electric universe spokesman, had been in my office just before this